Hello, I'm Jason Walsh, Executive Director of the BlueGreen Alliance. We unite labor unions and environmental organizations to fight for a clean, thriving, and equitable economy. Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion. A recently released report called Factory Towns demonstrates a significant political shift in the working class, manufacturing-centered communities that were once the drivers of economic prosperity and a strong middle class for workers in America's industrial heartland. This report reflects a reality the BlueGreen Alliance has seen on the ground. For years, workers have watched as factories and jobs left their communities. At the same time, they've experienced attacks on their unions and on their rights to form a union. And when lost jobs in these communities have been replaced, if they've been replaced, it's typically been by non-union jobs that pay less and offer fewer benefits. Many of these workers who are also voters are looking around and thinking that their children will be the first generation in their family with less opportunity rather than more. And that's why we're here today, because it's time to build back better. With the right investments and policies, we can create and sustain high quality union jobs, revitalize American manufacturing, and get these factory towns in the heartland and around the country back on a path to opportunity and prosperity. Build Back Better legislation that's now being debated in Congress makes multi-billion-dollar investments to help manufacturing companies across America retool and expand to build the clean technologies of the future. We can bring manufacturing back to the US and fill gaps in the supply chain, ensuring we produce clean technologies here in this country. And we can create good union jobs, the jobs that drove the economies of factory towns for generations, and can revitalize them today. We know that people in the Midwest prioritize manufacturing as a way to create good paying jobs. In a BGA survey of voters in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, Democratic, Republican, and independent voters overwhelmingly, 90%, said retooling American manufacturing and modernizing our factories to build products and technologies in the United States was important or very important to them. Build Back Better legislation is also an opportunity to seriously address the climate crisis, something that's already impacting the lives of residents in the heartland, the people in Michigan who've endured historic flood after flood this year, the people in Pennsylvania who've endured one of the hottest summers on record. We know that investments in the House Build Back Better Act alongside the bipartisan infrastructure bill would get us close to meeting our 2030 climate targets. We need to hold on to the climate investment level in the House bill, but also look for ways to close the remaining emission reduction gap, particularly if the Clean Electricity Performance Program is dropped from the final legislation. We believe targeted new investments in industrial decarbonization can help fill that gap. America's industrial sector makes up over 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. If the electricity used by the facilities is included, it makes up 30% of our emissions, making it the biggest source nationally. Policymakers have focused substantial policy and funding on reducing emissions from the power, transportation, and building sectors for good reason, but we've done little to reduce emissions in the industrial sector. We have to do better and can do better by including investments in the budget bill currently being negotiated to transform America's industrial sector through the deployment of commercially available emissions reductions technologies to modernize, upgrade, and deeply cut emissions across the sector. We can do that by making tax credit programs that already exist broader to provide help to achieve far-reaching emissions reductions in our industries, and by creating new grants or forgivable loans for deep decarbonization at the largest industrial facilities to make them more competitive in an increasingly carbon-constrained global economy and provide significant benefits to their workers and the communities in which they're situated. It's the BlueGreen Alliance's guiding principle that we shouldn't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. We can and must have both. We are now in a unique moment to embody that principle in the policy choices we make as we finalize Build Back Better legislation and get it across the finish line, along with a bipartisan infrastructure bill. We can build a clean, equitable economy that mitigates the effects of climate change and provides family-sustaining jobs to the workers who will build our clean energy systems, rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and manufacture the materials and components we need for a clean future. Doing that can turn around the lives of workers in factory towns across our country and these workers and their communities will remember who showed up for them and who did not. On that note, let me turn to our, do we have Senator Casey on yet, or will he be coming on later? Abby, can you give me a shout?
I'm here.
Okay. Let me introduce someone who has always been a champion for working people, has always shown up for working people and the environment. I'd like to introduce now to speak to us the U.S. Senator from the state of Pennsylvania, Bob Casey. Senator Casey, it's an honor to have you join us. Welcome.
Hey, Jason, thanks very much. And I want to thank you and this all-star cast. I'm going to keep my remarks shorter than I would have otherwise, because I want to make sure I hear from others on this call. I'm just grateful you're willing not only to gather, but to fight and to run the long distance race that this is, to focus on the challenge of climate change. In our state, I try to repeat over and over again what that challenge is. We know that it's real. We know it's caused by human activity. We know that it is a threat to human life itself. And the fourth thing we got to state is we got to do something about it. And that do something about it part is what we're presented with right now, an opportunity to take steps, and not only to combat climate change, but to help so many workers and so many communities. And in the usual parlance and dynamic in Washington, of course, sometimes reporters and certainly people on the hard right, they want to force a choice between one and the other. We're not doing that. We're just not going to play that game any longer. We're going to do both. We're going to meet our obligations, and they are obligations on climate change. And we're also going to do that in a manner that's consistent with lifting up workers and lifting up communities. And for too long, people in Washington, including folks in my party, haven't been willing to embrace the message that you all have been promoting for a number of years now. Finally, we're not only at the point where there's consensus, but there's also a legislative vehicle to effectuate what we've all been talking about all these years. So we're not going to choose between one and the other. We're going to make sure that we take advantage of the remarkable potential in domestic clean energy technology and manufacturing. We're also going to take advantage of a well-trained, dedicated, and highly skilled workforce that has grown out of our industrial past, but also is still part of our the dynamic that's present today, to rebuild both crumbling infrastructure as well as lifting up these communities and making sure that no worker and no community is left behind as we confront and tackle the challenge of climate change. One of the things I worked on with our team and with members of the Finance Committee is to, in the last markup, which seems like 100 years ago, it's only months ago, to include strong domestic content requirements for renewable energy projects, as well as tax credit bonuses for investments that prioritize both industrial manufacturing and industrial and manufacturing communities for both clean energy projects and clean energy project expansion. So we've got to be clear that that challenge is right in front of us. A lot of workers, as I was making this point to a colleague recently in a private conversation, these workers aren't anticipating some impending doom down the road. A lot of them are feeling it right now for lots of different reasons. And we've got to be there for them as they confront the challenges of today. So whether someone worked in a coal mine or a power plant or a steel mill or any kind of other heavy manufacturing or emission heavy manufacturing, we've got to make sure that those who have powered our economy and helped build this nation are the subject of our attention and good policy as we tackle climate change and create millions of jobs at the same time. So look, we can point to why we're in this position where these communities have been left behind, even as we've neglected our climate change obligations. I would argue it's 40 years of rigging the tax code for rich people and powerful corporations, but it's also some bad trade deals along the way. It's not going to help us much to bellyache about the past. We've got to invent the future, and the future is tackling climate change while lifting up workers and communities. Obviously, that doesn't mean just any old job. We need green union jobs, and that's a commitment that I know we all share. So you all know that you've worked with us to put together legislation that we still have some work to do within the Democratic caucus, by the way, because of the scope and the reach of this legislation as it relates to workers. But I'm honored to be part of this team where all of you and several unions came together at the same time, in addition to a good combination of Democratic senators, Senator Brown leading us in so many of these fights, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Baldwin, Senator Bennett, Senator Duckworth, Senator Smith, and Senator Warren. It's a pretty damn good team. In addition to all of the unions, I'll just go through the ones that I have in this right in front of me. The steelworkers, obviously, Tom representing them today, obviously, and leading them. The mine workers, the utility workers, AFL-CIO, BlueGreen Alliance itself, as you know, the National Wildlife Federation, League of Conservation Voters, Natural Resource NRDC, Union of Concerned Scientists, Sierra Club, and the Environmental Defense Fund. That is a power team that knows how to win. And in the end, when we win these fights, America wins, our national security wins, in the future of our children will be the big winner. So thanks for making it possible to bring together this coalition in a fashion that allows us to win the fight. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Senator Casey. It's an honor to work with you on these issues, and thank you for being such a champion. We are now going to turn to Mike Lux. Mike is the co-founder of Democracy Partners, and for our purposes today, the co-author of the Factory Towns report that we've been referring to. Mike?
Ty, thank you. Thank you to the BlueGreen Alliance. Thank you to Senator Casey for being here to support this work. I want to tell you about this study that we did, but I'm going to start with the story of Ottumwa, Iowa. When I was an organizer and a lobbyist for the Iowa AFL-CIO and for the Machinists Union back in Iowa in the 1980s and early 90s, Ottumwa was the most Democratic county in the state of Iowa. More Democratic than Des Moines or Iowa City or Ames. It was consistently year in, year out, and in great part that was because the UFCW, the Steelworkers, the AFSCME, UAW had lots of members there and were helping us keep that town and that county as a Democratic stronghold. Fast forward 30 years later, and Ottumwa has gone for Trump by increasing margins 2 elections in a row, and it's been joined by a lot of other formerly Democratic towns in Iowa, and this you know, as you can imagine, given where I'm from, this has bothered me deeply. Since I've come to Washington and seen the patterns, so my organization helped commission a study all across the Midwest but also including Pennsylvania and upstate New York, where we studied the sort of classic manufacturing belt Some people call it the Rust Belt, but my friend Sherrod Brown says don't call it that. We don't want to call it that. But it's that those old line manufacturing states. And what we discovered is that in those states, and it includes 10 states. It includes all the battleground states: Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. It includes Ohio and Iowa, which used to be battleground, and Missouri, which used to be battleground states, but aren't anymore. As well as Illinois, Indiana, and upstate New York. And what we found is that Democrats, because of high turnout, did better in the big cities in those states by a margin, if you add them all up, by a margin of about 500,000 between 2012 and 2020. Democrats also did better in the big city suburbs. And there's been a lot of talk about that. And we have done better by about 500,000 if you add up all the numbers in all the suburbs, the net margins, and which is all great. But one thing that Democrats unfortunately have tended to ignore too much in their political calculations is they tend to think of big cities as the Democratic vote, rural areas as the Republican vote, and suburbs as the swing vote. But what our study showed was that there are bigger swings actually in these small and medium-sized manufacturing towns. And the way we defined that was we had a higher than the national average on manufacturing. So the national average is about 11%. We called it a factory town or a manufacturing county if the local economy had 13% manufacturing, at least 13%. Most of them had more than that. And what we found is if you got away from the big cities and the big city suburbs and were in a county that was manufacturing heavy, Democrats have been doing far worse than they used to do. In 2012, if you looked at the medium-sized towns in that category, Obama on net won those counties. Now he's losing them by almost 700,000 votes for a net loss of almost 800,000 votes. If you look at the smaller counties with a heavy manufacturing base as part of their economy, we've lost ground in those counties to the tune of almost 1.9 million voters in terms of net Democratic performance in those counties. These are places that used to be more swing vote places. These are places that used to be, in some cases, like my beloved Ottumwa, used to be more Democratic, but they're turning more Republican because they are feeling deserted, they're feeling desperate, and they're feeling like the National Democratic Party is not looking out for them anymore. We also dug deeper into the demographics. These are counties where the worse the job loss in terms of deindustrialization and factory closings, the worse the job loss in terms of those factories, the worse Democrats did proportionally. We also found that if you look at, for example, the opioid epidemic, that the worse healthcare outcomes because of that plague, that's so heavy in the manufacturing states, the worse we did there. We found that the worst suicide rates, as suicide rates have gone up in these counties, which they have in so many of them because of all the desperation, the worse Democrats did. These voters felt like Donald Trump was speaking for them and fighting for them when he was expressing his anger at the establishment. And we, as a result, they are turning more and more to conspiracy websites. They're turning more and more to right-wing nationalism. And I'll make one other point. These are also counties that have some of the heaviest union job losses. It used to be in those kinds of towns and counties that unions would be there to organize people, to educate people, to build solidarity between workers, and to get them to turn out and vote for Democrats. But unions have disappeared as factories have disappeared, and so a lot of those voters are now turning to Fox News, or they're turning to crazy websites to get their political information. And so I think the Democratic Party needs to really focus on these kinds of towns. The good news is, Jason talked about this, Senator Casey talked about this. The good news is that the Build Back Better plan and the infrastructure plan address a lot of what we want to do. They bring more union jobs back into these towns. They bring more manufacturing back into these towns. And so if we can rebuild manufacturing in this country and make people feel less desperate, and if we can make sure that they're union jobs, not just manufacturing jobs, but union manufacturing jobs, we can make such a huge difference in people's lives, and we can start bringing them back from the abyss of Trump and his ilk, and start having them vote for Democrats again. I will stop there, and happy to take questions or be engaged in dialogue with the panel.
Thank you, Mike. I'm actually now going to pivot to the panel. You laid out in a pretty compelling way some of the problems. Let's now talk about some of the solutions, and let me introduce our panel. We have United Steelworkers International President and BlueGreen Alliance co-chair Tom Conway, who leads the Steelworkers, who are 1.2 million members and retirees strong across the United States, Canada, and the Caribbean. We have Gene Karpinski, who is the president of the League of Conservation Voters, a BGA board member. LCV has more than 2 million members, 30 state affiliates, and grassroots and community organizing programs across the country. And we have my colleague, Zoe Lipman. Zoe is the BlueGreen Alliance's Director of Manufacturing and Advanced Transportation. She leads our federal policy work on these vital issues to our economy and to our climate. And our panel today is moderated by Patrick Gaspard, the CEO of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, who held a number of prominent positions during President Obama's 2 terms in office, including serving as U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of South Africa in the president's 2nd term. Patrick, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you so very much, Jason, and thank you for the work that you're helping to lead from the BlueGreen Alliance. You left off my most important role in the Obama administration, which was to be a friend and partner to Senator Casey. I want to thank him for always leading, not from a space of crisis, but towards moments of real opportunity, and for helping to steer and guide all of us right now during this tough reconciliation moment. I'm really thrilled to be able to join this all-star panel where we're going to talk directly about implications of all of this in the lives of workers, implications for democratic outcomes as expressed in our elections, and what all this means for policymaking, particularly direct reinvestment. I'm going to start with President Conway. President Conway, you know, of course, that the Steelworkers are near and dear to me. You all are over-identified with the state of Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh. As Jason said, you're all over the country. You're in a wide variety of industries, including and especially manufacturing. And so it's appropriate, I think, at the start here to turn to you after that fantastic report by Mike Lux to help us appreciate how your members, how the steelworkers have felt the impacts of outsourcing, deindustrialization, and how passing the Build Back Better legislation will deliver results for these workers, their families, and their communities. Now, President Conway, as you do that, I think we won't mind at all if you lean a little bit into even some questions of how your members have performed over time at the ballot box as a consequence of deindustrialization and outsourcing.
Great. No, Patrick, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. It's good to join. You know, a lot of friends here, Senator and our union have been closely linked for years, and the work we did, Patrick, with you at the White House. And look, I was reading through Mike's not entire report. We joked about that earlier, but clearly he identified an issue that's been out there for decades and just growing and festering, and particularly in our union. And we're a manufacturing union, a carbon heavy union, a heavy industry union in many ways. And so this has hit us head on. And, you know, as I was thinking about this panel today and what we were going to talk about, it's sort of perplexing to watch that on the West Coast, we have anchored all these ships who can't get in. And the country's in a bit of a panic about, oh, how are we going to get our goods in? How are we going to get them to the dock? Who's going to unload them? And no one's saying, well, how come we just don't make it here anymore? And how come we're so dependent on these ships who are anchored off of the West Coast to bring in all the goods that used to be made in these mid-sized and small-sized factory towns that Mike's identified, where there's just so much angst and so much distrust and so much real anger at the government for allowing this to happen this way. And that the government who they relied on to protect them from sort of this outsourcing, this assault on their lifestyles, really did nothing, and in fact promoted it. And so after years of that, years of sitting back and allowing assault on organized labor, which could build a middle class, which could provide people a real opportunity to make a living, raise a family, send their kids to school, all of that fell on these people. And now folks wonder, well, how come they don't want to vote for Democrats anymore? It's really not very surprising. And when Trump comes down the escalator, he comes down not only with a message of hate, but he comes down with a message that identifies these people and says to them, you've been screwed over. And so they migrate there and they begin to listen, because he has managed to really co-opt the message and convince a lot of people. So within our union, I have had as many as 50% vote that way, who used to be solid Democratic voters, but really just don't trust that the party has their interests anymore and isn't fighting for them. And in fact, went off and made a bunch of trade deals that allowed this to go on. So we now are at a turning point. And I believe this administration and this president and many economists now have come to understand the harm that all that deindustrialization did, the whole story of globalization and how everyone was going to prosper. And it really was a fallacy. And so now we have a chance to build back. And look, we're entirely supportive of both parts of this infrastructure bill, both the hard side and the social side. It all needs to get done, and Congress just needs to move and figure out the deal and get this thing moving. Because if they delay and if they do nothing, they're done for another generation. No one's going to talk to them. So the Democrats have a bit of a challenge in front of them, but they need to come together and get this over the finish line and get it done. You know, we have allowed our communities, our services, our police, our libraries, our schools to be hollowed out. I mean, there is a lot of plywood up in a lot of towns across our country. And it's really just, it has been so unnecessary, so damaging, and so harmful to American workers and their families, and just what they thought would be a way of life for them. So, look, I think Mike's report, in some ways, is an important guideline for the party and where it needs to go. But in some ways, this is a story that has been sitting out there for so long, and there's not a lot of surprises in what it finally undercovers. So, look, we're happy to join here today. We are at this turning point in this country with this bill, and it's you know, for a long time we've invested in a lot of different things. We give tax cuts to corporations and the ultra rich. We've spent a lot of money on wars, and it's time for us to spend a lot of money in our country, rebuilding it, bringing it to the place it needs to be, creating the kind of jobs, skills, and future for American workers. And I think it's crucial that we get this done. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to join everyone today.
That is all powerfully expressed. President Conway covered a lot of the waterfront just now, gave us a real history lesson on where we've come from in these towns and where we've arrived at, and the kinds of decisions that average citizens have made when people come forward with simplistic solutions that gives them a sense that maybe towns that have been hollowed out can achieve some dignity yet again. Gene, I think that is a perfect segue to your work and the work of the League of Conservation Voters. You focus a tremendous amount of attention and resources on elections. And I wonder, as you think about everything that President Conway just said, especially the fact that a full half of his membership have now changed their political orientation as a result of everything that Mike Lux just laid out. What lessons do you think the Factory Towns report holds for our current elected officials and those who aspire to be elected officials who are going to be running next year and in 2024? And what do you think this all holds as a valuable centering lesson for the entire environmental movement? I think that there have been times in the past where you might agree with me, where the environmental movement has been not as broad and as inclusive of those workers as it needs to be. I think that's changed, but there are some lessons here, and I hope you'll lay them out for us.
Great. And Patrick, great to see you in your new role. Congrats on that. And on a daily basis, we work with folks on your team like John Podesta and Christy Golfus in the middle of trying to get this historic package done. And hats off to Senator Casey and all the other senators you mentioned who are really leading the effort inside to make sure we do make this historic progress. BlueGreen Alliance, Tom, your leadership in helping the BlueGreen Alliance be what it is today. Jason and his team building that, fantastic work. And Mike, again, a great report that in one sense isn't news, but it's sharpened the serious problem we have here. And take a step back for a second. So when candidate Biden campaigned, he talked about three major crises: a climate crisis, an economic crisis, and a racial justice crisis that need to be solved, as well as a public health crisis with COVID. But the economic crisis, the climate crisis, and the racial justice crisis can be solved with one big solution that we're all trying to make happen. And again, we've focused historically on making sure we solve the climate crisis to reduce those emissions from carbon and other pollutants, to make sure we get a handle on the climate crisis that, as Senator Casey said, is smacking us in the face. People see it now every day. They're living it. We're experiencing it. It's right in front of us. But the way this package has been put together, it will help address the racial justice crisis to make sure that 40% of the investments are made in impacted communities and communities of color that are most affected by the climate crisis. And that's historic. That's great. But also historically, as we said, and again, the BlueGreen Alliance has helped drive this, the package that we're trying to get past, both the bipartisan piece, but much more importantly, the Build Back Better pieces through reconciliation, will make historic changes in the way we try to solve these problems. And that's what Senator Casey alluded to. So take specifically, Patrick, the whole package of clean energy tax credits out of the Senate Finance Committee, where Senator Casey sits. It's done differently than it's ever been done before. And again, I think as you alluded to, environmentalists have not been as responsive as we should have been historically in making sure, as we create those new clean energy jobs, and we will create those jobs, but making sure they're both made in the United States, they're done in the United States with domestic content, and done with good union paying, good high quality jobs. And that's what's different about this historic 10-year tax credit package. led by Senator Wyden, but a lot of other senators on that finance committee, and a similar package in the Ways and Means Committee that does things differently, like it's never been done before. Both it's a 10-year package to make sure we get long-term investments, but importantly, make sure that they're incentivizing the good paying, high quality union jobs using domestic content here in the United States. And that's critically important, and that's different. And then we all support that, and that's critical. And just alluding to what Tom said at the end, one more point. So look, we know we need to do this because it's the right thing to do for all the reasons that we talked about. It's also it's good policy, but it's also absolutely good politics and essential politics. Jason at the beginning talked about the BGA survey. So 90% of the public, Republicans, Democrats, and supports these kinds of measures. That's fantastic. But just as we've done some research and others have, just as importantly, remember, if the public wants to reward folks who support this package and punish those who don't support it. And that's as it should be, because the public supports this Build Back Better program and likes the fact that this can address some of those economic challenges and the racial justice challenges and the climate crisis. But just as importantly, if we don't get this done, then shame on the new leadership in the House and the Senate and the White House. We're confident, we're working every day, but we need to get this done because the public will not be happy. They'll be thrilled because these are wildly popular proposals and they want them to get done. But if we don't get this done, it's going to be a policy disaster, but also a political disaster. So now's the time, now's the moment. We're confident we can get it done. And with this great alliance of power team inside the Beltway, in the Congress, and all the folks in BGA, BlueGreen Alliance are working together to get it done. But now's the moment. It's an historic opportunity. It won't totally solve the problem, but it can be the biggest down payment we've ever made, and done in a way that helps create those good paying union jobs in all those important Midwestern states. So thanks for being a part of this.
Gene, you have your organizer's hat and megaphone on today. You got me all fired up and I'm ready to take to the streets. So thank you for laying that out so comprehensively and with such conviction as well. Zoe, I'm going to turn to you now because it's time for us to get to a little bit of some specificity. And I hope, given your work, your experience, you can help us to kind of dig in a bit to get to a delineated sense of the opportunities that exist right now in Build Back Better to very specifically invest in manufacturing and in the industrial sector, and how on earth, by doing that, we're going to manage to bring emissions down at the same time.
Thanks so much, Patrick. It's an honor to be here with you and the rest of this panel. And, put simply, Congress has a historic opportunity right now with the Build Back Better package in front of them to turn the tide for manufacturing workers and communities in America. The package has the potential to make powerful investments, as you mentioned, across the manufacturing and industrial sectors. And let me, as you suggested, dig into those a little bit and give a sense of what that practically could mean for these manufacturing communities and for workers really across the country. We're looking at an opportunity to reinvest, to retool and rebuild American manufacturing to build the clean technologies of the future across the country. That's through mechanisms like robust funding of the proven 48C manufacturing tax credit program, which has demonstrated its ability to enable companies to take on these opportunities, again, in communities across the country. But it also means new tax credits to onshore supply chains, like in the solar industry, in the offshore wind industry, in batteries and battery materials, where we know these are rapidly emerging sectors, but where other nations are way ahead of us today. We've seen the danger to our economy and to jobs when we have huge gaps in supply chains where we're fully dependent on other nations. And so there's a real threat to our economic security, as well as to our ability to lead in the technologies of the future. And the package Congress is considering now would make major investments to bring those technologies here. then it helps ensure that as the world moves to electric vehicles, that those vehicles and the batteries and the technologies that go into them are built in America, and in the manufacturing facilities and the communities that build today's vehicles, as well as elsewhere in the country. That's through things like the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Loan Program and conversion grants, which again, as I mentioned, help drive investment back precisely into the communities that we've just been talking about. As technology changes. And then across all of these policies, I just want to re-emphasize what I think Gene just mentioned, that we're also seeing, and others, that this package includes strong labor and domestic manufacturing, domestic content standards across the full range of both infrastructure and clean energy deployment incentives. So as we build out the technologies of the future, we are at the same time ensuring that the next generation of jobs in new industries and in the industries we have today are increasingly good union jobs, and that we have new pathways, new access into those jobs for more workers and more communities, into pathways into middle class careers and increasingly prosperous communities. And just to give a picture of the kind of difference this makes, these policy decisions really do have an impact. We were involved with a recent report that just came out from the Economic Policy Institute that looked in particular at the critical auto industry, which is a huge portion of our manufacturing sector. A real driver, and found that as that industry moves to new, increasingly electrified technology, over 200,000 manufacturing jobs in that sector hinge on decisions policymakers make now that can onshore critical battery and materials supply chains, retool these existing facilities, and help ensure that the jobs that are built in the auto sector moving forward are good union jobs. Second, as Jason mentioned at the top, we also have a major opportunity to modernize and upgrade our basic industries, things like steel, aluminum, cement, many others that are as critical to the future economy as they are to today's. We have the opportunity to make them the cleanest and most competitive in the world. And not only does that secure jobs today, reverse the decades of offshoring and lost jobs that many have mentioned, but we also have the opportunity to achieve additional emissions reduction. And key to getting this job done is action now to both speed deployment of commercially available emissions reduction technologies across major emitting facilities, and that's through ensuring inclusion of these kinds of industrial projects in a robustly funded 48C tax credit program, which I mentioned before, but also at least $5 billion in grant funding or forgivable loans for the deployment of deep decarbonization technology at dozens of the largest emitters that would achieve, at least 50% reduction in those facilities, but frequently far greater greenhouse gas emissions reductions, as well as reductions in conventional toxic pollution. These actions would not only be transformative of some of our basic industries, critical to slowing the flow of jobs overseas and often pollution as well. But these efforts would be expected to achieve emissions reductions of over around 100 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually, but would also be a foundation for greater emissions reductions from other kinds of advanced technology deployment measures that have to be built on this foundation of reinvesting to transform our industries. So just to close up, this really is America's chance to get back into the race to manufacture the future. We've spent decades, as others have mentioned, watching manufacturing and jobs flow overseas. and seeing towns and cities across the country lose hope. It's time to act, to bring back and secure good manufacturing jobs, revitalize communities, and build a clean, thriving, and equitable economy for us all. And Congress has the opportunity to do that in the bill that's in front of us today.
Thank you so much, Zoe. You didn't fail in any respect to take up every dimension of the question that I posed to you, and it was your own kind of stirring rendition of make the manufacturing belt great again. As I listened to you, as I listened to Gene, I really tried to think about the experiences that I've had with President Conway's members throughout that entire belt in Ohio, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, et cetera. And everything that Zoe just described represents a seismic sea change in our industrial policy. But I just wonder what the conversation is that needs to be rooted, anchored right now in the immediate with those workers, so that we can begin to turn around some of the trends that President Conway described in their electoral performance, and that Mike Lux dutifully lays out in a altogether stunning way in that terribly important report. So I want to actually come back to you first, President Conway, to help us all appreciate what it is exactly that those members, those workers need to hear, and what they need to feel once we get this legislation passed in order to begin the steady turnaround of the outcomes that we get in our democracy in that region. And then I'm going to come back and then I want to pull Mike Lux into the conversation as well, but I'm going to come to Gene and Zoe again on that question, because everything Zoe said is critical, but it don't mean a thing if it's not really felt in the hearts and souls of those workers, and if it's not felt soon.
Well, I think, Patrick, it's more than what they need to hear. It's what they need to see. They need to see the relocation of workplaces in their communities, and they need to see factories opening up and offering jobs and offering opportunity for themselves and their families and their kids and their community. And look, they've heard a lot of politicians make these promises over the years, and nothing really materialized. And even when Trump made all the promises and put a tariff on steel and aluminum across the globe, it was done very ineffectively, and it didn't result in a lot of jobs. I mean, people just paid the tariff and came in. So it has to be that the government really comes to the term that we are first going to put these operations in our country, and whether that's through the manufacturing tax credits, whether it's through very strong Buy American policies that has to be incorporated in all this. But we have to make up our mind that we're not going to listen to that old narrative about we'll get it cheaper offshore, we'll get it regardless of its carbon content. I mean, we have a carbon intensive industry, and we're very prepared in promoting, we can do a lot of direct air capture, we can do a lot of sequestration, we can clean up these industries very well. It's going to take some money. But if you're going to allow that company to move offshore because it can now produce the same product with 3.5 or 4 times the amount of carbon, then put it on one of those ships and send it back and put it on a truck and bring it right back to where it came from a year ago. That's exactly what we've seen happen. And that policy needs to stop. And our government needs to step in at the borders and say, it's not coming in. And if you want to sell that stuff here, you're going to have to build it here. And it's not, this isn't rocket science. This is about, a very small handful of people who made a lot of money moving product offshore and played that arbitrage and made that money in the beginning. And all of a sudden, here comes a 1%. And those people who had good union jobs They didn't walk away from the union. Their job was taken from them and moved offshore. And their opportunities and their chances for their families were taken with them. So people can talk about this all they want. And if the Democrats do nothing more than talk about it in this cycle, they're done. This is the time to move, to stop talking about things, to stop making promises, to get some work done, and to begin to heal the country. And if they do that, they will again become the party of working people and working class America. And that's where they need to focus, because that's where their future as a party lies.
President Conway, with the fierce urgency of delivery right now, we're running to the end of this panel discussion, but I want to give Gene and Zoe an opportunity to come back in for about a minute and a half each on that question. I remember when we passed Obamacare in 2010. One of the great challenges that we had is that the benefits were not felt for a number of years. So as voters walked up to the polls in 2012 and 2014, they had not yet felt the effect. However, by 2016, they understood that something might be taken away from them by Republicans. So how do we take up President Conway's sense of fierce urgency of now in delivery? How do we make certain that all of the incredible benefits that Zoe described begin to be animated in people's lives in those states sooner rather than later? First Gene, then Zoe, and we have to be succinct here. Gene, you're on mute.
I also agree with everything that Tom said in terms of the urgency now. And just a sharp thing, the problem is in DC, the debate is about 3 trillion, 2 trillion. It's about numbers. And this is about programs, as Zoe laid out. We talked about the tech that's going to create those jobs, those good paying union jobs in these key places. That's the story we need to tell. When this gets done, hopefully very soon, and it's got to happen soon, so people see the effects in the next year, start to see those effects. Tell the stories about the jobs and the programs, not about the numbers, and then elevate those stories. And so in next year, talk about the new workers getting jobs here. Talk about the new plant reopening here. Talk about the union paying jobs to build the clean cars future. Elevate those stories. Mike started with a story about Atumwa. Talk about the stories of the new jobs in Tom's union and others that can be created in these key places, in these factory towns. And that's the way we win the policy and win the politics.
Zoe, you have an opportunity to put the exclamation point on this and to take us.
It's really hard to follow these two speakers and yourself on this, but I will just follow up real quickly to say that I think this issue of the fact that these aren't just policies, they're investments being made in real cities, in real towns, in real plants, is something that we're already seeing folks talking about as we go out, as our partners, both on the labor and the environmental side, are out in these communities now, and in these states now, talking to folks about this package. Folks are beginning to sit up and say, oh, wait a minute, if you're investing in this kind of manufacturing, what is that? Which are the companies here that could benefit? What does that mean for my community? And it's bringing exactly these partners together to begin to think about the plan that they might do to see this stuff implemented, or to look for state policy that would complement that. So, this is really a powerful opportunity to bring folks together around these concrete solutions that could uplift communities.
Thank you for stirring responses. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership in this moment. But I'll remind everyone that we're at the precipice of making great transformation here because of work that you've all put in for years and the way you've institutionalized these provocative ideas. So thank you all. Good luck to us all now. Let's go get this done. Jason, I turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Patrick, for being a fabulous and very time efficient moderator. I want to thank our panelists, Tom Conway, Gene Karpinski, Zoe Lipman. I want to thank Senator Casey, who's now off voting on the Senate floor. And I want to thank Mike Lux for his fabulous report and being able to summarize it in a mere 15 minutes. But we've got work to do. We got to get this done. So let's go out and do it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.